Welcome to Dungeon Master Talk, a podcast by Dungeon Masters for Dungeon Masters. I am Dungeon Master Shay.
And I'm Dungeon Master Kyle. How are you doing today, Shay?
Kyle, I'm doing great, man. It's good to have you back this week.
Thank you. Listeners, sorry about that. Had a little bit of a family emergency. All is on the mend and trending better. So yeah, just looking forward to be back talking about some Dungeons and Dragons and being a Dungeon Master.
For sure, man. Hey, everyone, we just thank you so much for taking time out of your busy schedule to come join us for this discussion. We say it every week, and we truly do mean it. We appreciate you so much. If you would do us a favor, if you haven't done so already, please subscribe to this podcast on your favorite platform of choice. That will help us in the algorithms to help get the word out about Dungeon Master Talk and hopefully grow that community as well. If you feel led to, please leave a 5-star review. Any other reviews you can email directly to us. But any 5-star reviews you'd like to leave, we would super appreciate that. We do read every comment and every post. So please, if you do feel led to do so, we would greatly appreciate that. Kyle, what are we doing this week? What are we talking about?
Well, sir, I think this one, it's one that we have been talking about since before the podcast.
True.
It is one that I think for both of us, we were always kind of hungry to talk about, but a little hesitant to actually pull the trigger because fortunately for both of us, we haven't encountered this so much. But sir, we're going to be talking about the sticky situations, the less fun side of being the Dungeon Master, head of the table, God of the universe at creation. What do you do when you have problem players or problem situations just as a whole in your play group?
That is definitely a sticky situation. And like Kyle said, we have been fortunate that we have really great groups.
Yes, completely.
We don't have problem players in that respect from our group, but I know that a lot of Dungeon Masters have run into this, both seasoned Dungeon Masters as well as inexperienced Dungeon Masters as well. So this is a real big topic, I think, because in any case, when you have a discrepancy, and especially in a game like Dungeons and Dragons, where the rules are fluid, they're not necessarily as concrete as a lot of other games. There can be situations for strife. There can be situations where people don't really agree with the ruling, or they don't like the way a situation was handled, and the list can kind of go on and on. So as the DM, and you're kind of thrust into that spot, what happens? What do you do, and what are some good ways to diffuse those situations? We will also talk about players that are what are called rules lawyers, right? Yep. So if you have a person in your group that is very knowledgeable about the rule book and uses that book to the nth, 9th, and 12th degrees, that can be a situation sometimes because like they may know the book better than you, and that's fine, but ultimately it is your game. So to go on that topic, for experience, I think Kyle and I were kind of talking about this, and like we said, we don't have much experience in game with this, but both of us in our respective work careers have been leaders of teams of some sort.
Yep.
I've been a department manager for a retail store at one point. I was a supervisor in a warehouse. Kyle, I think you have a current team that you're leading in your occupation right now, right?
Yep. For listeners, I am a software engineer lead. At one point in time, I oversaw a team of 12 personnel. Now I'm overseeing a more manageable team of 4. So definitely something that Shay and I we do have experience working in the people aspect of things. And I do want to quickly note to everyone, we're not equivalent. We're not saying that the Dungeon Master is like the equivalent of a manager or team leader, that personnel type thing where it's like, hey, I am in charge of you giving tasks. It's not equivalent, but when you're working with people,
correct.
I think what Shay and I are able to bring to this is hopefully just another tool, another way for you to approach the scenario that hopefully, honestly, you don't encounter.
Yeah.
We obviously hope that you can avoid it. And I think we can still talk a little bit about that aspect because a lot of these situations, empathy gets you a really long way.
Mm-hmm.
Because why do people get so passionate in Dungeons and Dragons? Because it's easy to remove from the game, detach for a second and say, hey, look, this is a game. Why are we getting so passionate about it? Why are we getting angry? Why are friends who've known each other forever fighting about this? Or conversely, if you're somebody that's doing the pickup D&D style where you went to a shop that maybe was having it, or you joined an online group, and so it's maybe people you don't know. Why is this person that you don't know so well getting upset about this? It's something, I think, if we slow down for a second and understand, this is something that people are investing a lot of their time in. A lot of times this is a serious form of escape for a lot of us. Without even realizing it, we pour real parts of ourselves into these characters. And so when things go the wrong way, it's not how you expect, it can be jarring. And it is us participating in the story, stop and realize we get upset when characters and stories that we didn't create, that we didn't spend hours and hours and hours investing our own personal time into, aren't treated well in other forms of media. So it's even that more so deep and attached when it happens here. So for us as DMs, I think it's always good to open with that empathy, trying to connect with where are they coming from. Even if you can't fully understand it, because it can be that heat of the moment type deal. But if you can start with empathy, it is going to help that resolution come a lot easier.
For sure. And I think sometimes too, you have to differentiate the person from the situation sometimes. Yep. If for whatever reason, let's just say you've been playing for a year, give or take, you've had, anywhere from 12 sessions to 40 sessions, right? Depending on how frequently you play. And you have this even keel player that all of a sudden in a situation just snaps, right? Yep. You have to take into consideration, is this the person snapping or is this the PC snapping? That's number one. Number two, if they're normally even keel and they all of a sudden snap and it is the person themselves that's snapping, is it something that's outside the game that's all of a sudden just triggered and they just snap, right?
Yep.
So that's something you have to keep in mind too, that maybe they're just having a bad day, they're in a rough patch. And usually D&D, like Kyle was saying, it's kind of an escape for people. And for whatever reason, a situation happens in the game and they just can't handle it anymore, right?
Yep, it gets a little too real or it hit on something.
Yeah.
And oftentimes, listeners...
It could have happened to a family member.
Yep.
I mean, it could have happened to them. It could have happened to a friend. There could be any number of reasons why it happened.
Yeah, when someone's triggered and they're heated and you're in the midst of something, very, very, very rarely is that the sole factor involved.
Mm-hmm.
There's normally more to the story, and you might not be you might not have sight to that. It might not be something that you're privy to. That was the word I was trying to get out earlier before I had to come at it a different way. But
take two.
Definitely a take two there. Or it might be something that's this is something that they were living with in silence the whole time, and this was one step too far. I think that one, let's start with that scenario first, because I think that is one that it might be a little bit more common, especially in D&D, where it's something that you, Dungeon Master, we do, according to the rule book, get to create our own rules to a degree. We can edit the rules. We can create our own world. We get to set, my world, magic's a little bit more sparse, although we do have a villain wizard, we do have good guy wizard, and magic is known through the world. It's not like people don't believe it exists. It's that you don't find wizards everywhere. And so that compared to somebody who comes from a game where magic is super commonplace, that can be a little bit jarring, because that means not every town we come to in my world sells goods that a wizard could purchase to expand their repertoire. So that's something that I have talked heavily with my magic users in my playgroup to make sure that they are aware. They're hey, for you, pay attention to the goods that we're going to have in the wild. There are going to be some shopping opportunities, don't get me wrong, but it's not going to be every shop like the fighter. But the fighter, the real good stuff is not going to often be out in the wild for them to find. That's going to be in the goods, because in my world, if it was abandoned out in the wild or left somewhere, it probably wasn't that special to begin with, or is worn with age. So it might have once been good, it's less good now. I apply that kind of logic to it. Those are conversations I've had with my players. But if for any of them, that could be something that gets old. Like, why does the fighter always get to come in here and buy new armor or get to buy a brand new weapon? And I have to go through this dungeon and maybe at the end there's something I'm looking for. That's a scenario that hasn't came up for me yet, but it's a scenario that's possible. Like, for me as a dungeon master, I think it's always important to be touching base with my players. Hey, how's the story going? Are you having fun? Is there anything that I can be doing better? I don't ask that after every single session, although to one of my players, I do message him after every single session and ask him how to...
That's me. That's pretty much
like,
me.
hey, how do you think that went? But get that feedback and like be open, receive it well. When somebody says like, oh yeah, that was really fun, one little thing, don't get defensive about one little thing.
Mm-hmm. When
you don't receive feedback well once, you shut off the door to feedback. So it's not like one thing for us dungeon masters too. We got to watch. We can't take it personally. We're asking our players to role play, but detach and have fun. We also have to do the same then when we ask for that feedback.
Can be a little bit harder, I think, for the dungeon master because you are opening yourself up a little bit more, I think, sometimes than the players because you're investing the whole point of the game is from you. Like, you're writing the entire thing. So you're kind of writing your heart on a sleeve in some respects. So it can come across as a little bit more personal.
Yeah, I've never been more stressed in my life than session 1 of when we were completely out of the pre-con that we built on. And we were actually stepping into my world 100%.
Yep.
I've conducted job interviews. I've written job descriptions. I proposed to my wife. This is up there in terms of how stressed out I was. Proposing to my wife was honestly not as stressful because I was 100% confident she was going to say yes, but I was still insanely nervous because I wanted to make it a special moment. This situation, I was not 100% confident it was going to be fun to everybody. This world that I made was super cool to me, and I have invested so much into it, and it's super cool to me, and I love it. But just because I love it, I'm not convinced that means others will love it. So like it is. It's something that we pour a ton into.
I do want to kind of step back for a second here, Kyle, and kind of talk about like the random outburst situation. Yep. One thing, and it just came to mind, we had talked about in our session 0 episode, I think it was, one of my original DMs had told me about this system where if somebody was having a hard time with the situation in hand, there was a communication system to where it was like either a timeout symbol or like a red card that they would hold up and say, hey, I'm not good. I got to stop. Yep. I need a moment, whatever that ends up being. If you get something like that, stop the game, excuse that player, give them a second to regroup, maybe gather their thoughts. If you need to go out there with them and ask them what the issue is, keep it game related. You can ask about personal stuff off session, like outside the game, and sometimes that's a conversation that's needed. But if you can keep in that moment, try to keep it mostly game related if you can. Yep. Obviously, like we said, sometimes if you get triggered by outside things, it's going to be a little bit harder to come back to the table. And if that's the case, then maybe they need to excuse themselves for the night, and then you and that player can talk about it one-on-one. I think really what it comes down to is really interpersonal communication. Honestly, if you can develop a great line of communication with your players, that's going to go leaps and bounds in preventing outbursts like that, as well as when they do happen, to where you have a structure for that.
Yep. And I think it's always important to prioritize the people and the lives of the people they're playing the game with over the game. And that means you have to pause the game for a while. Like, that means, end this session and take some time to reevaluate. So maybe you have to miss one. That is far better to maintain that relationship, maintain those connections, and make sure everyone is happy and healthy and safe within your games than to drive the story as you originally planned it. Because, trust me, you can have fun in this game and tell any level of story. It doesn't, in order for this game to be fun, it doesn't have to be dark and gritty. It doesn't have to be insanely real. Because this game, let's stop for a second. This game has fairies and dragons and goblins and pixies and the ability to fly and teleport and literally a spell called Wish that lets the player, literally, they could just wish for the game to be over and it's done. You're not the DM anymore.
Pretty much.
And so, of that session anymore, you'd have to revamp. So,
Pretty much.
This game obviously intentionally has all these fantasy things, and we naturally will pour ourselves into it at any level of storytelling. And you can have really compelling storytelling that only goes so far in terms of violence, only goes so far in terms of stuff that the level of topics that you get into, keep it fun and safe for everyone, and have very compelling stories. Think back to like Lord of the Rings, Chronicles of Narnia, fantastic stories. Yep. They didn't have super dark, gritty, like shock value things in them because they didn't need to. Mm-hmm. It's a fantastic story. We can tell fantastic, meaningful stories that help us explore. Like, for me, Dungeons and Dragons has been huge in helping me feel confident in, like, sharing out for a group, in building something, presenting what I have to others, my ideas. And that's been huge for me in terms of just, like, my life, how I interact with family, how I interact with my job, how I interact, period, with other people. Dungeons and Dragons has helped a ton. And so, like, we've done that without having to go into areas I'm not comfortable going or my players aren't comfortable going.
For sure. So let's kind of change gears a little bit. Let's go to the rules lawyer, right? So this person is kind of like that guy, if you want to call him that. Like, he's kind of like, you know, you don't want to have a Karen, quote unquote, in your group. I'm not saying like having a person who's actually named Karen. Like, that Karen's probably cool. But if you have a Karen,
or what's the guy one? It's not Chad, because that's. But I'm
no, it's not.
Sorry,
that.
Everybody listening to this is like these idiots. They don't even know the stands. Is that Stan?
I mean,
is that a thing?
I mean,
I'm not hip. I'm not
there's
cool
words.
World. Like, listeners, I am not.
Yeah, I mean, yeah, that makes two of us.
But anyway, you'll know this person.
You just don't want to be that guy. Like, that guy. We'll just call him that guy.
Yeah, because it's like, oh, well, technically, you have to roll all your damage dice twice on a critical success. Mm-hmm. But that's not how Shay handles critical successes in his game.
Nope. I mean, yes, I understand the rule, but I'm the DM now.
Well, and also, Shay, don't you know you can't cast Hold Person on an owlbear?
I do now. But at the same time, like, okay, so Kyle, let's just say I was that guy in your group, right? And I'm sitting here and I'm reading off this rule book and I'm throwing the book at you. How would you handle that?
Well, honestly, I think that's time again. Pull this aside. You don't want to have these conversations in front of the group, because this isn't a time to shame or say my way is better than your way, because straight up, it's not. Nobody's way is better than anybody else's way here. Both ways of playing the game is valid. It is valid to play the game 100% rules compliant, and it's also valid to make house rules for the game. And so I'd want to have a conversation with you about, like, hey, we're not being that strict with the rules in this group. We're being consistent with our rulings, but these are the rules for us. And I was like, a lot of this, listeners, you try to iron out in session 0, but sometimes in that session 0, it's not always clear, or it's easy to agree to it there for players than it is to actually live with it. And this is something that, like, if the player's like, I can't do this, I think it's important to keep in mind, like, hey, what is the group looking for? Am I the DM, the only player at the table that doesn't want to be that strict with the rules? Because if the entire play group is telling me, hey, we want to be more to the rules so that we can quantifiably understand this, because that is one of the benefits of being strict to the rule book, is everybody knows. Yep. Then, okay, it's on me to, like, to me, I would adjust myself there if I'm the only one. But conversely, if it's just you, Shay, and you're my one problem player, I'm going to talk to you about it and try to get you to be in line with the group and say, hey, we're more about, like, having fun here. This is the way we're treating it. If it continues to be a problem, though, eventually that's when you have to have that conversation we all fear as a DM of, hey, maybe this play group isn't right for you. And
it could be one of those things, like, maybe this story isn't right for you. Maybe it's this particular group, like you said, like, they're more or less depending on the rules. Really, the biggest thing is taking the taking the fight out of the lawyer,
Yep.
right? It's not taking the fight from them and saying, I'm the DM, I do what I want.
Right.
Because that's basically just like taking your ball and going home. That doesn't solve the issue. It just says I'm quote unquote more powerful than you in this game, and that doesn't solve anything. Like if like you're saying, if you're trying to work with me and saying, okay, this is how we're going to do it. This is why we're going to do it this way. And if this is going to be an issue, we can talk about this later outside of the game. But for right now, would you leave the rulings to me?
Yep.
And you and I can discuss the finer points of the rules after the session and go from there. I will say this, and I want to give a shout out to one of my players, my sorcerer. He has been playing D&D since he was like middle school, right?
Right.
So he's basically played literally every edition of D&D. And it's it's really funny because like I can describe something and within about a sentence and a half, he knows exactly what monster I'm about to throw out. It's scary. Yeah. It really is. And it's a credit to him because he knows the game and he's very, very good at the rules. But the thing I really want to drive home with this is he's very good at saying, okay, Shay's the DM.
Yep.
And I'm not even shy about it. Like sometimes I'll even ask him, do you remember the ruling on blah, 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 blah? And he'll tell me. And that's fine. But he also understands that like, I'm going to let Shay be the DM because that's his role in this game right now. My role is to play my character and I'll let him do his job. Yep. Kind of thing. So it's one of those things where having a rules lawyer is a good thing. It can be a good thing, but when you get pushed over the edge is when the rules lawyer tries to exceed the DM's chair, and that's where you can kind of run into some situations.
Yep, and we have had many times in my game where we have paused to say like, "Hey, does anyone know how this works? All right, let's look it up," because honestly, I have not played every class there is to play, and I haven't been playing any of them in every possible scenario with every possible spell list combination against every possible opponent. Right. That would be amazing if I had. That's a lot more time than I have.
Well, give us like 15 more years and a few more games. We'll figure it out.
I've only, like I said, started really playing this game back in 2013, so I have. And it wasn't solid. I haven't been playing it for 10 years straight. There's many years there where I didn't have a group. I just had the desire to play. So I was not fortunate enough to get to play all those. If you have, amazing. I am jealous of you. That is super cool. But
I mean, I've played a fair amount. Most of them were fighters and barbarians. Actually, most of them were barbarians. Actually,
yeah, you do love you a barbarian.
But I've branched out a little bit.
It's the class after your heart.
Yeah, it is.
But with that, I think like in every one of those scenarios, we either found the rule we were looking for or I made a ruling. And there's been more than once that I've told the group, we're going to move forward with it like this. Afterwards, we'll talk about it. If we were happy with it, then that's our rule. If we weren't happy with it, then we'll address. But I have said we won't retcon this moment. We'll just in the future treat it right. And a lot of that, listeners, because some you might be listening to this and maybe you've been DMing for a while. You're thinking about putting on a live play one day. That is one thing that when you're going into a live play, I do recommend work through the rules a bit more first, not to get it 100% right, but to know your rulings going in so you can be consistent. But the benefit of not playing for that and you're just playing for the fun of it and your own story is those situations that we're going to handle it this way now and different in the future is more possible. And you don't feel as guilty for it because you don't have your listeners saying, hey, but you said this before.
Exactly. The biggest thing is staying consistent, whether you're going to be a rules Nazi or you're going to be a free spirit DM. The biggest thing is you have to stay consistent with whichever way you go.
However you rule it. That way your players can know how to play the game.
Exactly. They know what to expect and they can kind of formulate their ideas on what their character's going to do based on how you're going to rule it.
And so one thing we haven't really talked about here, we mentioned it, is having to have that unfortunate conversation of maybe this group isn't right for you. And this is obviously something that none of us DMs ever enter a game wanting to have this conversation. And it is my significant hopes for every single listener to this that you will never have to have that conversation. But I think that is unlikely because as this spans, more people listen to it, the odds of you encountering that grow. So I'm going to give my 2 cents on this, having not had to have this conversation yet myself. So take it for the grain of salt it's worth. try your best 100% preserve the friendship first and foremost. Whatever your relationship is, if it's a friendship, a spouse, family member, preserve that over the game. I absolutely love this game. It is not worth my friendships to Shay. It's not worth my friendship to any one of my players. And so preserve that first. And I think, like, it doesn't mean that you can never play D&D with this person again. It might mean that you have to take a break. It might mean that maybe you can't DM this person, or maybe it doesn't work when you're the DM, it works when they're the DM, or it works when you're both players, or maybe you can't be players, one of you has to be the DM, whatever that situation is. Yeah. But preserve the friendship first.
I think to piggyback on that, the biggest thing with that also is just be honest. Mm-hmm. Don't sugarcoat it. Don't beat around the bush. Just be honest. I mean, don't tear into them like they're a bad human being, but just present the facts. Say, hey, I noticed when we had this situation, you did blah, 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 blah. You did A, B, and C, and that is not in congruence with our group values or how I'm ruling this game. We need to talk about that. And then that's how you can kind of stem the conversation. But don't sit there and be like, or you get passive aggressive and don't use in-game tactics for out of game situations.
Yeah, never.
Like if you're having a problem player, do not take out your frustrations on their PC in the game. Right. That is not the way to do that.
Yeah, don't be that guy that kills that DM that kills a player character because you had an issue with the player. Because that's going to escalate. Exactly. That's purely escalation. And
not only, that you're in the wrong, but also your other. No, you're fine. But the other thing too is your other players are going to see that too. It's not just you and that person. You've got at least probably 4 other sets of eyes on you watching you do that. Oh yeah, it can get ugly, and it can get ugly quick. And then you get marked as that DM that nobody likes.
And listeners, it's really one of those things. This game is awesome. Being a DM is awesome. It's not worth cutting those ties like that. And we do get invested. Yeah. Heck, I'm invested to my reoccurring one-off bard, Cade. I haven't played him in a long-standing campaign yet. I am invested into that character. If Shay here was to hold a one-off and insta-kill Cade at the beginning, I'd feel a certain way about that.
You'd come over and we'd go rounds, man.
In a loving way.
It might not end well for me, but one other type of problem player, and this is a little bit more subtle and something that you might have to keep in mind, is that player that usually disengages from the group. Yep. Right? So if you get that player that's, for all intents and purposes, like your group is like, okay, we're going to go take this quest off in the mountains somewhere. We're going to go find this ogre or troll, whatever. And this other guy's like, I'm going to go dig a hole to China. Has nothing to do with what your group is doing, but all they want to do is dig a hole to China. Yep,
they don't even want to
China doesn't exist in your world, probably. And if you're trying to dig a hole from China to the Sword Coast, you're going to be digging for a long, long, long time. It's one of those things where either there's something that if you can notice it as quickly as you can, there's a disconnect there. For whatever reason, they're starting to disengage from your group, from your game. Whether it's a character flaw, like it's a built-in character flaw that they've made for their PC, and maybe that's something you need to talk to and say, hey, what is it about this game that this PC doesn't like or that you're not on board with? What can we do to remedy that? Do we need to change characters? Do we need to maybe add more fighting, add more roleplay, whatever the case is? Keep an eye on your players that tend to drift off. Now, if it's a one-off thing where they just randomly like, I want to dig a hole. Okay, you dig a hole. And then like for the next 3 sessions, you're digging the same hole. That's where you're probably getting in trouble.
Yeah, or if it's reoccurring, like not always. So it's like on this adventure, they parted, or like you guys were into the dungeon. They're like, you know what, my character just wants to go sit in the corner, doesn't want to continue the crawl. Find me on your way out. And then the next time you guys are investigating castle, my character doesn't want to climb any higher. Sometimes this has happened in my play group where we go for a little bit. Now it's kind of getting late. Players starting to get tired. I've now told my group, like, hey, don't be shy. Tell me that we're getting tired. We'll wrap up. I build energy off that game. I get wired. No matter when we stop, it could be 11 p.m. or 3 a.m. I have to stay up another hour calming down minimum.
Yeah, you and I are usually playing Rocket League for about an hour or so.
Yeah, and
after the
talking about it
game.
because we're hyped. But that's
It's
not
true.
the same for everyone. Some people that role play, while they may still love it, is exhausting. It takes a lot of energy to do. So I've told my play group, like, hey, if you're getting tired, tell me. And that, like, a couple sessions ago in this past session, they were open about it, and it was great. We ended at a really good time, and we had a good length session, but we didn't go too long to where for some people it was becoming difficult to stay awake and have energy for that role play anymore. So that was something that, it wasn't problem players like this talking about, but it's something to notice, be observant about in your group.
It's kind of like a quote unquote quiet problem player, or like a quiet issue.
Yep, it wasn't anything anyone was getting mad about, but it was something that we needed to address. There is also another, and so I want to make sure that we finish this one, but there's one more I want to make sure we talk about.
Okay.
All right, so we've talked about a lot of stuff where it's like the player versus DM for whatever reason, or player has a problem with session. Sometimes you're going to have players getting upset with players. And this will be, they don't agree with what the character did. They don't think their character would do that. Like, I think DM, it is our job to be that mediator at times. Because sometimes it can, and especially with younger players, feel like they are trying to beat the game more than roleplay their characters. And other times, they make, to them, this character decision that makes a ton of sense to them because they are actually role-playing this character. They know their backstory. They know what this is. And to somebody else who doesn't, maybe your group hasn't shared backstories yet, or, they did, but it's been a while now, and that's not forefront on their mind. So to them, they're like, hey, this character decision you're making, it's out of nowhere. I don't agree with it. I don't think your character would do that. That is, in roleplay world, that can be fighting words to some people. So it's our jobs as DMs to get ahead of that. Calm the group down. Sometimes it's like calling a break. I call breaks fairly regularly in my group, and like I said, I haven't had problem with players, but sometimes it's just like, hey, like we're getting energetic, we're getting off topic, let's call a break. Let's get drinks, bathroom, come back, refocus, ready to go.
Yeah.
If you call that break and they keep arguing, that's when it's time to step and be like, hey guys, not worth the argument. This is what we're doing. We can talk about this. Yeah. Let's take a longer break. Like really, like I think it's our job there to really make sure that give them chance to separate and cool down. And to the player that has the issue, sometimes they're right. And this is something that's out of character for the player because maybe they are trying to win the game. Sometimes they're wrong because it's a character decision based off information they're not privy to. Or, it's maybe going to be harmful. Maybe it's not even something they disagree with the character choice, but it's like, this is going to hurt my character. Why are you doing it? Remind everyone, we're playing a game. It's not them doing it to them person. It's fictional character doing it to fictional character. It'll be okay.
Right.
Like, as you're in, it'll be okay. Sometimes you have to say, like, hey, everyone, this is the full scenario. This is everything that's going down. This is the situation. Calm it down, bring it down. You can also help with the rules in that situation. Be like, hey, whatever the situation, I'll give you a chance of saving throws. If you're doing this, maybe you're like, it is going to hurt this other player. I'm going to have you have a disadvantage because maybe there'd be some internal conflict at this. Not full bore out of your character. There's ways that you can mitigate this to not be as harmful, to maybe lower the tension, but make sure it's a conversation and bring that energy down a little bit.
And I think it's a fine line, honestly, because like I remember one session, and I wasn't the DM for this one because I was still really, really new, but we had the same guy I was actually just talking about that he's been playing for a long time. He was in a heated discussion with another player. I think he was playing a warlock, and the guy I'd mentioned earlier, he was playing a druid. They were having some fight about nature. I couldn't even tell you what it was. It's been years and years and years. We watched them as they were going back and forth, and it got heated. It got to a point where I wouldn't say they were screaming at each other, but it was a very heated discussion. The DM allowed it, and he allowed it to happen because we all understood that this was in character. We understood that both players knew outside that, like, we're cool. Like, we know that you guys are going to be friends walking away from this. But if in character, we didn't break that moment because it was such a good PC versus PC interaction. And it was really funny because we were walking through this forest and as they were bickering, and there was an arrow that went right through between the two of them. And we all looked over. There's a group of bandits. They're like, hey, we're trying to rob you. And they both looked at the leader and go, hold on. And they kept arguing and it kept going and going and going. And finally the fight broke out. And then they just went through this whole thing like Legolas and Gimli and we just slaughtered the whole group. And they kept bickering through the entire fight. It was great. But the biggest thing is as the DM, it's a real fine line. It can be, especially with people that don't know each other as well. If it starts as a really early group and a lot of new players, it's a fine line to make sure that fight is actually in character and stays in character versus gets outside of the game and goes between the two parties involved.
Yeah, that story reminded me of during our last session, our fighter and our wizard had a somewhat similar situation. The fighter tried to tell the wizard to get better at magic. And it led to, they got loud. And honestly, at one point, as DM, I was like, hey, like, checking in, guys. And they both were kind of like, what do you mean? This is in character. Like, both of them just instantly calm, like, this is in character. Why are you stuff? And then back at it. I was proud of them.
No, God, man. It's like, no, man, we're good. We're Gucci. Just let us go.
And then, like, afterwards, they both, like, they went from yelling to, like, when it was over and then it was over, they both just start laughing. Because they were both so happy with how the other one did on it. And that was just like massive shout out. And like, because then the wizard turned it on him and he was like, well, why can't you just get stronger? It's like, just go be stronger. And the fighter like then kind of 180'd his argument.
Just like, do better. Just do better.
Because he was like, well, learn it. Learn this spell, level 8 spell, level 5 wizard. And the wizard was like, great, go be stronger. You can't lift mountains.
Yeah, here, let me just work on that, okay?
I was like, it was so amazing because these two played it. And I honestly I was watching it and I know them both pretty well. I've known them both for years. I was watching it, and at one point I was like, okay, I think we're getting heated. Like, I'm going to step in. And they're both like, we're role-playing.
Nope, back up. Back off, DM. We got this.
I'm always going to check in on my players like that when they're like that. But I was very proud of these two. Really, the whole party, our role-play, I think, has been getting stronger and stronger almost every session. Those two this time, that was probably one of the best role-played interaction between those two characters. And it was insanely fun to watch once I knew. Right, they know this is the player characters, not the players getting mad at each other.
And in that story I was telling you about, like, we had been playing that game for roughly about a year and not quite a year and a half. I want to say we were at least a year. I would say we were at least a year. So, not to mention, like, we had known each other for years. I mean, probably most of us worked together at the same store. So, I mean, we knew each other. And so we were able to just let that whole thing just kind of happen. And we actually still talk about that moment sometimes to this day. We're like, oh man, that was a great session. Yep. But I guess to wrap this thing up, Kyle, the biggest thing I think when it comes to problem players, and we kind of touched on this a little bit, but I want to kind of land the plane a little bit, is communication and communication and communication.
Yep. Before, right? During, and after.
So before, during, and after. Like we kind of referenced it to session 0, the more you can hash out how things are going to go in session 0, that will give you that framework to be able to handle when situations arise, whether it's a ruling that the players don't agree with, whether it's a player versus player thing, whether it's a player trying to check out kind of thing. There's that framework to be able to resolve those things and give you an avenue to bring that session back together stronger and even better than it was before.
Yeah, guys, it's also, if you're already going and you're saying to yourself while listening to this, man, we had our session 0, we didn't cover this. We covered, this is the setting, we didn't cover what to do in these scenarios. It's never too late. Obviously, just like anything, the best time to start something was always in the past. The second best time is now. So your next time that you meet as a session, and even if you're a player and you're saying, hey, our group didn't do this, don't call it out in the session then, but reach out to your DM and say, hey, we didn't cover what to do in these scenarios in our session 0. Do you mind covering it at the start of our next session? And have those conversations. The next best time is always now. Trust me, it might sound like, oh, I don't want to apply that many rules to this fun thing we do as a group. But trust me, it'll make it stronger, it'll make it safer, and you'll have more fun because those are there than you did because they weren't there.
The better groundwork you lay for a foundation, the stronger your house is going to stand once you build it.
Exactly.
On that note, thank you everybody for joining us this week. We super appreciate you being here and listening to us talk about problem players and what to do and how to handle those situations. Like we said at the beginning, if you hadn't already and you feel led to, please leave us a 5-star review on your platform of choice. We would super appreciate that. If you would love to tell us about how you had a problem player and you resolved that as a DM, or any situation like that, or if you'd like our input on a situation that you're going through, please feel free to email us. We would love to talk to you. Our email is dungeonmastertalk@gmail.com. You are more than welcome to email us at any time on those. If you want to catch us on social medias, we have a Facebook page, the Dungeon Master Talk Facebook page, and we are on Twitter. You can reach us at DMT the podcast, or use hashtag Dungeon Master Talk to tag us in any shape or form. Yeah, social media and I are still working to get to know each other pretty well. But anyway, so on that note, for all of us here at Dungeon Master Talk, I am Shay.
And I'm Kyle.
And we'll see you next time on Dungeon Master Talk.
Bye, guys.